Yep, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Hey,
Yep.
good to see you.
Likewise. How are you guys?
Good. Thanks for
Great.
dropping in.
Of course. My pleasure. I know I'm a minute or two early here.
Yeah. So if I could ask everybody who is not speaking to mute, so we don't pick up any background noise. And then when you're ready to say something or ask a question, please unmute and fire away. Well, Josh, it's really cool to have you. And I know that you are actually doing a program like 2 weeks from now that's going to be released on the Hall of Fame website, and I don't know if I saw it somewhere else too, but so we get a sneak preview. So we're privileged to do that. So you've been at the Hall of Fame now as president for just a little over 2 months.
I did. Yeah, just started literally the day after induction ceremonies was my first day. I started actually working at the Hall about mid-August, but didn't technically take over till the day Jeter got inducted. He left town and I took over, I guess. That's the way we did it.
Okay. So are you drinking out of a fire hose, or has it been pretty manageable?
It is, I'd say both. I mean, that's definitely the term I keep using. You can imagine you come from a team background where things are very, very different than a nonprofit with just so many different things to this job than what I was necessarily doing in Arizona, but manageable, yes. I mean, it's certainly, I feel like I've prepared my whole career for an opportunity like this. So while I am in fact drinking from a fire hose, I think it's been a tasty fire hose. The water tastes pretty good.
So you've been in baseball pretty much all your life, all your career. You grew up in LA and worked for the Dodgers. It looked like you had a couple stints with the Dodgers and then moved to Arizona and been there some time. And the description of your job, as you were leaving, let's see, where did I have it? It was pretty impressive.
Thank you.
All the I underlined it. Where is it? Anyway, I'm going to summarize.
Oh yeah, seriously, don't worry about it. We're all friends here, but keep it casual.
All kinds of stuff in communications and outreach and social media and all the stuff that sounds like it prepared you perfectly for what you're doing now.
Yeah, I mean, actually, what's interesting is I think I may have mentioned to you in a previous email. I mean, one of the coolest things about growing up a Dodger fan and then working for the Dodgers was I literally got to meet all of my heroes. I mean, and Pee Wee Reese was truly one of the first people I ever met on a old timers game, 1995. So cool when you grow up hearing these names to then get a chance to actually interact with them, and in some cases, obviously they're no longer around, and so I can't tell you how special that was. But I basically came up through marketing, and at the time they didn't even call it marketing. It was basically advertising and special events in the mid 90s. And I spent about 15 years, like you said, at the Dodgers. And then the opportunity came to go to the Diamondbacks, where there was actually my old boss, the Dodgers, had become president of the Diamondbacks. And that's how I ended up there. And so, you leave your favorite team, your dream team, this global brand, and I'm going to a team that's less than 15 years old and still doesn't, half the people in Phoenix still haven't quite figured out who they are. I mean, it's obviously they won a World Series, but it was a big shift. But I think the biggest difference was that this gentleman, Derek Hall, who's the president of the Diamondbacks still, he had told me he was going to kind of keep me right by his side, teach me everything it takes to run an organization in case I ever had that opportunity. And that's really what I've spent the last 10 years doing, is just taking on more and more various departments, various areas of oversight. And it led to my conversation. I don't know if you guys know who Jeff Idelson is, but the former president of the Hall of Fame here. He came calling and said, I'm retiring, but I think you'd be really, really good at this job if you ever wanted to possibly apply for it. And next thing you know, me and my family are driving cross country and landing in Cooperstown. It's been pretty special.
That's neat. So what have you been doing in the several months you've been there? Actually, I know you were there a little bit in the summer, but what are you just learning? Are you running the organization, dealing with employees, budgets and all that stuff?
Yep. So for any of you that are in business, you obviously know kind of this time of year, we're finalizing budgets and things like that. But ultimately, what I think surprises a lot of how many I don't know whether you maybe try to use the raise hand function for those. I don't know how many people here have actually been to the Hall of Fame before. Have many of you been to Cooperstown already? Yeah, so a good number of you. That's awesome. So I think it may surprise some of you that it's close to 100 full-time people. This is not I think when I was kind of first hearing about this from Jeff, my thought was it's probably 15, 20 full-time people operating this crazy place. But it's close to 100 people. So yeah, ultimately my job is really kind of threefold. The first is obviously running a 100-person business just the way any other would, with budgets and planning, and I have 7 direct reports. So everything from sponsorship and development to corporate partnerships to marketing to communication, social media, all the things that licensing, I actually literally just ran over here. Right. I came straight from our shop. I needed to pick something up for my father-in-law because I'm going down to see them for the holidays. And he was actually a Brooklyn Dodger fan growing up, interestingly. But so yeah, all the pieces of the business that are a big part of what I do. And then the other parts, I'd say one is I guess, for lack of a better term, the public face of the Hall of Fame, doing whether it's events like this or interfacing with the Hall of Famers. I came this weekend. I was at a event in Las Vegas for Tony La Russa, had a charity event. So I got to spend time with him and Joe Torre and really just kind of basically be out and about representing the Hall of Fame. And then the third big thing is I guess it's 4 things. The third big thing is development. We are a nonprofit, and most people don't realize that, but we are a nonprofit organization that isn't supported by MLB. So I'll be certainly outgoing and trying to solicit donations from people around the country as I travel and make my way. And then obviously the big events. If you've ever been to an induction ceremony, or if you've ever been to our Hall of Fame Classic game, and you realize this town of 2,000 people winds up just getting overrun by 50,000 people in some cases. And I think the biggest surprise for me since I got here is we don't have an events department. We literally have, you have one person whose job it is to put on events, and really she's more kind of travel coordination. But during the induction ceremony, we literally have like a person in the mailroom is doing hospitality, and a person from the library is doing transportation. And everybody comes together and they know what their parts are. And it's been working for decades this way. So, I mean, it's pretty impressive to watch this whole thing come together. And I feel very lucky that I am in fact running the organization, but a lot of the organization runs itself by virtue of being around for 80 plus years.
Yeah. Yeah. So in Louisville here, we have Derby Day, of course, and people come in from all over, and it's a big deal. And it's not just Churchill Downs, it's the whole city. I'm sure that's sort of true in Cooperstown too, that you have everybody gets excited about it.
Yeah, I mean, well, except for the people who live here year round, who are like, my whole town is being run over by, I mean, what's interesting is how many people wind up renting out their houses to people who come in for the weekend. It's a pretty overwhelming amount of people that come into town. And honestly, if you're not a baseball fan, which I've found it interesting, this town doesn't have necessarily more baseball fans per capita than any other. So whatever the percentage of baseball fans are that live in Louisville, that's the percentage of baseball fans that live in Cooperstown. And so you have some people who think this is the greatest thing in the world, that 70 living Hall of Famers are descending upon our town. And you have whatever the other percentage of the city that's like, get these people out of here. They're taking up all the restaurants and we can't get any parking. And so it's been an interesting, you learn a lot about small town life. And I came from, most of my stops in my life have been in big cities, Los Angeles, San Francisco, Phoenix. But I did spend my college years in Bloomington, Indiana, and there's a lot that kind of reminds me of that kind of small town, college town feel that Cooperstown has. It's pretty cool place to live.
Yeah. So if somebody from Louisville, will say, wants to come to Cooperstown, and they're not going to drive, flying into Albany, is that the best place?
Yeah, there's actually two. So Albany and Syracuse are almost equidistant. A lot of people do fly into Syracuse. I have not yet. I almost always do Albany, and I don't really know why. It just seems to be what I've been doing. But my understanding is you really can fly into either one. And what's cool, a lot of people are actually that I've talked to they may fly into Buffalo and they make a trip out of it, and they'll do 3 or 4 things up this direction and go see a Bills game and go see Niagara Falls and come see Cooperstown. And so, I mean, there's obviously a lot of ways to do it, but I can't recommend it more highly for those that haven't had a chance to get out here, or even if you have. I mean, we do try to change quite a bit over the years, and depending on when you last were here, I'm pretty certain there's new exhibits. And I mean, every single day, actually, I just did it earlier today. Every day I make it a point to go into the museum and see something else that I haven't seen, whether it's read a plaque from someone I don't know or go see an exhibit I haven't had, and I'll look at one case and really, it's just, there's so much great stuff that even if you've been here 2, 3, 4 times, I mean, it's going to take me years to get through just the stuff upstairs. And then you tack in the 40,000 items we have all throughout the archives that it's kind of mind blowing. In some ways it's overwhelming, but in other ways it's really, really cool to see the sort of stuff we have in this building.
I was there in 2013, and I had 3 kids. None of them were very interested, and my wife wasn't very interested. So I was like constantly in the state of stress. Like, so I have to come back.
You do.
But it was, the museum itself was impressive. But I would be interested in your archives. So when you go through the museum and have more time than I did and can just like veg out for a couple days, what is accessible in addition to that?
Interesting. So it's been different because of COVID. Obviously, just like any place else in the world, we were impacted pretty significantly. And so our research center, where a lot of people will go in, and you can actually, if you wanted to research Kentuckians in the Hall of Fame and really do a deep dive, our library will allow you. Previously, now we're not quite back yet, but before long we will allow people to get back into the Barchiamati Research Center and do that sort of stuff. That's different than the actual artifacts, the actual 3D artifacts, which really kind of require, we do have kind of private tours that they're not inexpensive, but they're not, I mean, if you're going to make the trip, it's well worth the extra expense, where we'll do what's called an artifact spotlight. And if you're it's not specific to player, it's usually specific to teams, but let's say you were a Brooklyn Dodger fan or you were a Reds fan, we will bring up 5 or 6 items from the archives that aren't visible, and you get a chance to put on the white gloves and kind of hold them or take a picture with a Pee Wee Reese glove or whatever, you name it. And we have a different set of artifacts for each of the 30 teams. So depending on who you're, I don't know where you guys are, there's probably a lot of Reds fans, right? I don't know what.
Oh yeah.
Is it mostly Reds fans?
I'm Cardinals.
Cards, okay.
But we have a Cardinal fan in Texas, but we have I would say mostly Reds fans. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So I mean, just we also have what's called, this is pretty neat, and so much of our stuff is actually now available online too. I mean, you could get lost on the Hall's website for hours and just keep getting sucked into the video, whether it's video, whether it's actual art. You can see 3D, like you'll look up a player's name and you can see, okay, well, we have a Chris Sabos, I'm making this up, but Chris Sabos goggles from 1989. Like, you've got all this amazing stuff that's searchable, and will be even more so when we redo our website next year. But there's just, I mean, it's the thing that I think is pretty neat. When you come in, you get asked now. This is a new program that started beginning of 2020 and really didn't get a chance to grow all that much because COVID. So we're going to relaunch it this coming year, but it's called the Starting 9. And so when you come in and you say, I'm a Reds fan, they'll hand you a sheet of paper, which gives you basically 9 representative items of the franchise. And so some might go back to the late 1800s, and you might be able to go find this baseball from Cincinnati in 1883, but you also might find Joey Votto's whatever glove from last week. And so this Starting 9, it's not the 9 best items. It's really kind of 9 representative items, just to give you an idea of the sorts of things in our collection. And we have something different for all 30 teams, and that's available on the website too. If you get bored, you can look up Red Starting Nine on the Hall of Fame website, and you'll get to take a peek through that stuff too.
Yeah, I mean, I did a little more surfing today before our call on the website, and our members are used to SABR website. They need to check out the Hall of Fame website because there's fantastic stories. One of the things I like, there's a baseball card, and the latest one is Alfredo Griffin, and
Yeah.
there's a pretty long story with various pictures front and back of the baseball card, and talks about Alfredo Griffin, and it talks about the card itself. So there's another tribute to Roberto Clemente, and they describe who the catcher was in the card. So so it kind of breaks down the card. It's pretty fun, but there's a variety of other stuff. I mean, you're right. You can get lost on it.
Yeah. And honestly, if any of you aren't, what we do, we do that card corner, which is an email that you get. When you become a member, you start getting the magazine and the email and tickets, all that sort of stuff. But you really, the magazine itself, kind of, if you don't get Memories and Dreams, I would recommend becoming a member just simply for that, because there's some really cool stories that you think baseball. I've grown up around the game. As we were walking around today, we were talking about, myself and one of our curators were talking about strikeouts. We did a whole magazine basically on the history of the strikeout. And man, you think a lot, and then you realize just how much is out there from the last 150 years, going back to, there was a guy who struck out 500 plus batters in a season. And I always used to think 20 strikeouts in a game was really the record, but it was actually 21 in a 15 inning game. Just some really, really amazing stuff that it never ends. You just keep learning more and more every time you pick up one of our publications on the website.
I think the last one was about home runs, and it had all the different nicknames for a home run in the shape of a guy hitting the ball.
Oh, that's cool.
It was just fantastic.
Yeah, that's very cool.
Speaking of membership, how much does it cost just to be a single member?
So I think we are around 60 for an individual. Don't quote me on this, because we were just talking about the other day, and I can't remember whether it changed or not. But
I think it's 50, but it may have gone. Yeah,
I think you're right. I think it may eventually go up, and in my mind, I think it's 50, and then for a family, it's 80. And you get the almanac, you get the magazine, you get access when you come to events here, and access to virtual conversations, all sorts of cool things that we're doing. It's funny nowadays. Zoom is so common for all of us. It's like it takes 5 seconds and everybody's just connected all around the country. But what's pretty cool is the Hall's been doing stuff like this well before COVID. They were doing virtual events and virtual education programs that were like this. And now it's become just this commonplace thing for everybody in the whole world. But from what I understand, the Hall's been doing this for a long time, and you just get, we recently had, for some of our larger donors, we had an event with Dennis Eckersley, where he just hopped on and started answering questions, and just some really cool benefits. If you check out the website again, you'll see it all there. I don't want to turn it into a sales pitch. I'd love to just more catch up and talk baseball with you guys.
Yeah, I mean, I've been a member for a while, and it is so worth it. There's stuff you can get on the website, but being a member 6 times a year, you get that magazine. And sort of the Zoom, us talking to you right now, is sort of something we couldn't have done 5 or 10 years ago. But also the other stuff that the Hall of Fame can reach out to people virtually, that would seem to be right in your sweet spot. Like, that's an area how to handle.
It is. I think in a way, it's kind of funny. I had a friend who came and visited me shortly after I got the job, and I'm not ashamed to say I'm 45, so I don't know if people think that's old or young. I sometimes think I'm a little older than I feel, but for a lot of people, they think, wow, man, you're pretty young for that position. And I think in some ways it's probably because my mind does think about kind of what the next generation is going to do. And during the interview process, we talked a lot about just staying relevant for the next generation of baseball fans. And obviously my generation and my dad's and parents' generation is really, really important. There's no doubt, but we also need to make sure that when my son and my daughter come to the Hall, that they have equally as good of an experience as I do. And so I will be, there's no doubt, I think in the years to come, you'll hear a lot about things that we do on the technology front, and both within the actual walls of the museum, but also online and through social media. Social media was an area that I've been involved in for 15 years, really the beginning of Facebook when it first started. I was very lucky to be at a team that the Dodgers let me kind of do what I wanted there. And we really tried some stuff that was a little bit wacky that most the Yankees weren't going to try, or Reds weren't going to try. And then certainly at the Diamondbacks, they really they took the reins off and we did all sorts of fun stuff. So I certainly expect that we'll have plenty of, whether it's virtual events or just other ways that the buzzword these days is content. It's just everything is content, and how do we get it to you, and how do we get you to take in, whether it's box scores or scouting reports or you name it. I mean, we just went, this is pretty cool, and I hope we can do this someday here. We were just in Atlanta for the World Series, and we had an extra day, a travel day where we weren't flying till later. So we went to the College Football Hall of Fame. And they've got this amazing, I mean, you walk in and they ask you who your favorite team is. So I said Indiana, and they give me a credential. And now my credential has basically just a QR code on it, which again was probably scary a year and a half ago. Now that you have to go to restaurants and order through a lot of times through a QR code, it's far less scary to people. But the next thing you know, my whole experience around the museum was basically curated for an Indiana and Big Ten football fan. Whereas if you're coming from UCLA, it's a totally different experience. You're coming from Texas or whatever. So those are the sorts of things that are fairly simple to do. And they really just make the whole thing better for whoever's coming in. That's not that you don't want to learn about people in New York and California, but if I can make it much more about Kentucky for you, I would think that'd be pretty cool, or about the team that you love, the Reds. So anyway, those are the sorts of things we have in mind. And great that I've only been here 3 months, but you can imagine my mind, the ideas are just constantly popping in of things we can try to do to stay relevant.
So I think of the Hall of Fame as a place, which is the building, which is Cooperstown, and also a state of mind, which is more like who's in the Hall of Fame.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're getting ready to come up upon that. Could you sort of describe the different levels of selection process, how that works?
Yeah, absolutely. So the one that's coming up that you're referencing is actually 2 weekends from now, December 5th. We will gather what's now, you used to hear the term veterans committees, and they changed the name about 3-4 years ago to the era committees. And so they broke up baseball into 4 eras, which is the early baseball, pre-1950, and which also now includes the Negro League, since MLB has elevated the Negro Leagues as given the major league status. Anybody who played pre-1950, Negro Leagues, non-Negro Leagues, pre-Negro Leagues, all that group is one era. You've got the Golden Days Era Committee, which is 1950 to 1969. Those 2 groups will be voted on this December, 2 weeks from now. There are 2 more eras, one from 1970 through 88, and then one from 1988 to present day. And those are the groups that, if you don't get in from the Baseball Writers Association, and I can talk about that in a second, but once you've made it through that ballot, anybody that goes back in time is eligible to be on the era committee ballots. Only 10 people get on there. So we have these very, very impressive historic overview committees that, deep researchers, sabermetricians, people who spent the whole lifetime studying the Negro Leagues, et cetera, that they put together a ballot of 10 people for each of those 2 eras, the early baseball and the Golden Days era. So now we have this ballot of 10 people, and we have 16 people coming to Orlando in about 2 weeks that will each, it's 2 different committees of 16 people. There's some overlap. It's very confusing. In the year where there's 2 committees, it's way more confusing. Usually it's only I think that only happens once every 7 years. But we will have those 2 committees voted on. And so the group of voters in this case is a combination of Hall of Famers, of historians, and of baseball executives, people who have worked in the game but didn't necessarily play. And so if you get 12 of those 16 votes, you can be elected. And that's how people like Ted Simmons or Marvin Miller got in during this last group. Then there's the Baseball Writers Association ballot, which actually hit the mail today. We just put them in our outgoing mailbox today. So with the U.S. Postal Service, God only knows when it's going to get there. But We are basically, it's about 400 writers in the country who have had 10 years or more of service covering a baseball team. That group is who will look at those who have retired basically over the last 15 years. So it's a much more recent committee. Committee is the wrong way to put it. I guess much more recent ballot. Today, we also announced, if you go to our website, you'll see the 30 names who are on the ballot. So essentially, to get on that ballot, you have to have played 10 years in the big leagues, and then you retire. You have to wait 5 years, and then you get on the ballot 5 years later. So this will be the first year, like David Ortiz will be on the ballot for the first time. Alex Rodriguez will be on the ballot for the first time. So anybody who gets on that ballot, you basically can be on that ballot for as many as 10 years. And if you make it through that whole process, but don't get 75%, then you become eligible to go on the other ballots. Again, I know it is a very hard process to explain. It sounds very confusing, but ultimately we want to make sure that we are never the ones making history. At the Hall of Fame, we try to document it. We try to honor the excellence of the greatest players, but we don't want to be the ones deciding who gets in and who doesn't. We leave that to the baseball writers, and then when they get through with their process, we then have these executives and Hall of Famers who will look back and say, did they screw up? Did they miss anyone? And then someone gets a second chance to get in through that route.
I guess a second chance, they never look at it and say, he shouldn't have been in.
We never, no, but it's interesting you say that. I mean, we don't ever de-induct anybody. But one thing we do say is that there's a plaque outside the gallery that basically, or not a plaque, but a label outside the gallery that talks about how induction is a process that takes place at a certain point in time, and after that, information. So there's, I'll give you an example. There's a gentleman in there whose name escapes me, but he's believed to have pioneered the curveball, created the first curveball. I don't believe that they now think that was the case, but
Candy Cummings.
Yes, there you go. Thank you, Ryan. Candy Cummings. It's like, you guys are even better than I am. Who wants my job? You guys can all come and do this. But there's a number of, I mean, there's when you look at some of the, bless you, there's a number of people that you maybe in recent years, whether it's for issues of race relations or other things you've learned about somebody that maybe they wouldn't have gotten in 30 years ago. We don't take anybody out, but we do try within the walls of the museum to put history into the proper context. And so when we had what used to be called Pride and Prejudice was the baseball, the exhibit that was focused on Black baseball. It's now called Ideals and Injustices. And when you walk in, it talks about essentially what the world has been dealing with over the last 18 months. And so, I mean, it just, again, we try very hard, whether it's new information comes to light or how do we try to explain something, we will never take anybody out of the Hall of Fame. Yeah, and it's fine. I don't know what would happen if it turned out that somebody, God forbid, some Hall of Famer went and murdered somebody now. Like, what would you do about that? And I believe our intention would not be to take them out of the Hall of Fame. Ultimately, they were elected and inducted at a certain point in time, and at that point in time, it was done on the information that we had at that moment.
Yeah, I mean, you're looking at their baseball life and not all of it.
So we do have that. I mean, we do have the character clause, which is why at this point there are some who have not gotten in, whether it's for belief of steroids or whether it was gambling, or I mean that the character clause does allow them to allow the writers and the voters on the era committees to take into account things other than just what happened on the. I mean, if it's just simply what happened on the field, there's probably a number of people who would be in the Hall of Fame.
Yeah,
and to the voters to decide.
And so all the headliners on TED, I don't know if anybody's gotten in. You know, maybe the best hitter ever and maybe one of the best pitchers ever.
Yeah.
People who hold all-time records have not gotten in, and I'm wondering how that might affect A-Rod too, because he had
I think we all have that same question, and you know, without trying to handicap it, I mean, ultimately you see where certain people, Bonds, Clemens, among others, who are, I think we're in the low 60s in this most recent one, the odds of them making that 14% jump to get in this next year, I'd say it's probably somewhat stacked against them. It's very hard to get the 75%, and especially to jump to a certain level. But I think ultimately, if the baseball writers determine that those two and or others don't belong in the Hall of Fame, we do have that other process with the era committees to allow another group of people to look and have that same conversation, have a debate about whether steroids or otherwise, whether they belong in there. And I guess that the other key thing that I think I've learned a lot in the last few months in this role is, people talk about, well, I can't believe Pete Rose isn't in the Hall of Fame. And the reality is he's not in the plaque gallery, but he's all over the actual museum. I mean, you walk around the museum and you can't, there's a whole case dedicated to 4192 and I mean, you name it. It's just, so ultimately, I don't think you can, I think it's easy sometimes. It's an easy way out for people to say, I can't believe the Hall of Fame doesn't have Barry Bonds in there. Barry Bonds is all over this building. He just doesn't have a plaque in the gallery. And I certainly understand why that debate rages on. But it's not like we're just cutting him out of baseball history. We're letting others make that determination whether he's earned an actual plaque in the gallery.
What are the other categories in the Hall of Fame for non-players? Like, go ahead.
So we have it's basically players. Of the 333, I think it's about 263 that are players, former players. You have managers, which is somewhere in the 30s or so. Number of inductees as managers. You have umpires, which I think is 10 umpires in history, and then what's called executives and pioneers, which I think just recently started being called executives and pioneers. It was executives for a long time, and that's everything from commissioners to club owners. Walter O'Malley moved the team west, and what that did for the expansion of baseball. I know he's an owner who's in the Hall of Fame, and so those are the basic categories that everyone is separated into. And there's 333 people who have been inducted into the Hall of Fame.
And is there a separate honor for announcers and sports writers?
There is. So what we have at the Hall of Fame, and they are not, they're not considered Hall of Famers. I think most people, you hear them say Hall of Fame broadcaster Vin Scully. Ultimately, they're the winner of the Ford Frick Award, which is for the broadcaster each year. And then what is now used to be called the J.G. Taylor Spink Award for a writer. But that's an example of one where it was kind of determined that Spink had probably less than, I don't know what the right word is. Not the sort, there were parts of his life that they did not want to honor anymore at the BBWAA. And so they ultimately now call it the BBWAA Lifetime Career Achievement Award. So those two awards are given out each year at the Hall of Fame ceremonies, but they are not plaques on the gallery. They are, and if you go around the corner to the Scribes and Mikeman wing, you'll see them they'll have their own little area there. And it's pretty cool. I mean, there's no doubt it's an unbelievable honor to be put into that exhibit, but it's not necessarily an induction into the Hall of Fame the way it would be for Derek Jeter, or Ted Simmons, etc.
I've got a couple quick ones, and then I'm going to open it up for other people to ask questions. What is the connection? Obviously, there's a strong connection to MLB. You all are independent of MLB, are you not?
We are. It's a great. I think most people think that we're funded by them and that we're part of them, and we're really not. The organization was started back in the 1930s as our chairman, Jane Forbes Clark, her grandfather, Stephen Clark, basically called the league and said, I think we should create this thing. And the league supported him, said, yeah, we'll go on board with this. But we really don't receive very much funding. I don't want to say any funding, because they have been very generous with an endowment gift that I think will help us for years to come, the way endowments operate nonprofits. But we are our own business. I love your dog, Roger. That's a good looking pup right there. We have to fundraise. We have to sell admissions and sell merchandise in order to, just like any other business, you try it. We're a nonprofit, so we're not worried about making a profit, but we are worried about balancing the books. And MLB, it's not like we can just call Rob Manfred and say, hey, can you float me a few million? It doesn't work that way, even though from their standpoint, they certainly could. And they're incredibly supportive too. I don't want to make it seem like they're not. The commissioner he was one of the people I interviewed in the process. He's on our board. And so he was part of the search committee for my position. And it behooves him obviously to have someone half decent running this organization. But it's not like I don't answer to him. Ultimately, I answer to the board, and the board's chairperson is Jane Forbes Clark.
And with respect to SABR, what is there like cross-pollination, or is there a direct dotted line or anything? How do you all interact with kind of the two most substantial baseball historical organizations in the world?
You know, I mean, what's interesting to me is in my 3 months here, we all have incredible respect for SABR. I think most of us are SABR members and have been paying attention like there's tons and tons of day-to-day interaction between the curatorial department and SABR, but I don't believe we have, or if we do, I'm not aware of any sort of like formalized. That's a good question. I actually need to find out if we have any sort of formal relationship. Their headquarters, oddly enough, were in Phoenix, and so I actually know their president and their CEO from when I was with the Diamondbacks. His office was around the corner from where I went to work every day. But it's really more, I think, just a mutual respect for one another. Obviously, a lot of SABR members are Hall of Fame members, and vice versa. We all have the same goal in mind, which I think is to preserve the history of the game. SABR obviously is very big on the actual research piece. And ours is probably more, I wouldn't say more documenting, but certainly we're documenting. I guess we're also doing research too. I mean, we are very, very like-minded organizations with similar membership bases, but I don't believe that there's a formal agreement between us and them. It's a good question. I'm gonna have to find out.
I would do a joint membership program where you can join both with one click.
All right, well, looks like Bill has that answer, so I'm gonna have to figure that out.
Well,
I'll tell you, I mean, I have incredible respect for, I just,
yeah,
I also, I mean, in a weird way, I also got very lucky that early on in my career, when I was at the Dodgers, one of our general manager for a 2-year period was Paul DePodesta. He was obviously Billy Bean's assistant, and really, let's see, there was a joint membership up for a year or so. Oh, all right, there you go, Bill.
Bill has been a vice president of SABR, so he would definitely.
Oh, awesome.
He would definitely know.
Oh, there you go. All right, well, we got to work on that. Hi, Bill. Thank you for that. But so having Paul, and I know I get the way the world kind of conflates sabermetrics with SABR, but just I think I've long appreciated everything that SABR has done for our sport long before I had this job. And I think it's, frankly, the fact that we don't have any sort of good relationship is a good thing for me to learn about. So
yeah, it's like WAR has now become a stat looked at in Hall of Fame voting.
Absolutely.
And so, yeah, and you know, it's pretty clear to me you got a team of writers, good baseball writers and researchers, and you know, the two organizations don't need to compete for sure. They just need to, you know, have their story straight.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you think about it, I mean, things that I've learned about just in recent years, the Seamheads database, which has really helped take the Negro Leagues, and that's in a lot of ways how the Negro Leagues got to be recognized by MLB, is certainly the work that was done by that group, all of whom I can pretty much guarantee must have been SABR members long before they were anything else. So, yes, and I know Tom, I think, oh, maybe I guess he's not. There you go, Harry. I thought I can't see the rest of that. Let's see. Leaving around 2000. Oh, see, I didn't realize that he wasn't still. Yeah, so Tom, who's one of our curators, I know that these guys are all in touch regularly with SABR, but again, I guess I'll have to understand why we don't have anything formal.
Well, I have some more questions, but I think I'm going to open it up to let some other people chime in, and I'll just sit by. Anybody?
Yeah, Monty, go ahead.
Yeah, Josh, thanks for joining us. This is great. You mentioned the players and others associated with baseball that are eligible for the Hall of Fame. There's been a lot of talk, I guess, in the last decade or so about coaches and scouts and potential eligibility for Hall of Fame voting. Do you have any views on that or any updates on where that might be?
I can't say I have any updates because it's really, I mean, it's not, having only been here for a few months, there's not a whole, hasn't been a whole lot of change on that front. I will say that it's one of the things I get asked about the most, certainly as it relates to scouts. Scouts, trainers, coaches, executives that are not just owners. I mean, I hear a lot of people talk about that. And I guess the short answer is I'd love to try to. Photographer is another one. I just had somebody talk about it. How come we don't have a photographer's wing? I mean, ultimately, the challenge is you can literally, you could go out. There are some unbelievable people who have worked 50 years in the game, done everything you could imagine that would deserve, quote unquote, induction into the Hall of Fame. The challenge, I think, becomes where would it stop, and how do we determine what? I mean, should there be a marketing director's piece of the Hall of Fame for the people that came up with bobblehead promotions? I mean, I say it kiddingly, but it's a pretty beer vendors. There you go, Harry. So there are, in fact, I mean, they're no joke. I have heard from people who believe vendors. We had a famous vendor both at the Dodgers and at the Diamondbacks who I've been told that should be getting into the Hall of Fame. I guess my answer is it would be very challenging for us to take on, just with the staff that we currently have and how much that goes into this, to take on, I think, the creation of more awards similar to the Frick Award and the BBWA Award. I think in some of these instances, I've certainly encouraged. I was recently encouraging someone at MLB who asked me about photographers, and one of my close friends is the Dodgers photographer of the last 35 years. He is an absolute legend in the game. But the reality is, I don't think we're going to probably start anytime soon a photographer's award that we then have to run and operate the way that we would the voting for the players that get in there. So I think in the instances where an award already exists, there may be a way for us to put that in some part of the display area of the hall. In instances where it doesn't exist, I'd encourage people that there should be a Photographer of the Year award. I won an award like 4 years ago. I shouldn't chuckle. It was actually very meaningful. It's called the Fishel Award, and it was basically for the head communications person in baseball. The plaque is literally like on the other side of that wall over there in an office in the office of the Hall of Fame. The plaque is on the wall. Now, I mean, does my name belong in the Hall of Fame next to Babe Ruth and Hank Aaron? No, I really don't think so. Not for what I did. And maybe a trainer's does but how do you make that decision? So I know it's a very long-winded way of saying it's something I'm very aware of, and I think I want to try to understand. I want to be in the job for more than 3 months before I have any sort of really strong opinion. But I do think there's a way to honor a lot of these people who have given incredible amounts to the game, and I want to figure out what the right way to do that is. Yeah, Roger?
Do you have an acquisitions budget, or is it totally reliant on contributions? And in just the 3 months that you've been there, has anything amazing walked through the door?
Great questions. So we do not have a budget at all. For two reasons. One, I mean, frankly, the cost of these items now it's unfathomable. I mean, there was about once a week, I actually have our head of curatorial, Eric Stroll, will walk me around some piece of the building, because I don't come from a museum background. This is a long-winded answer, I apologize, but I'll have him show me various things around the building so that I can kind of understand how did this exhibit come to be and what were we trying to do. And so there was a day he walked me by, 99% sure it's Joe DiMaggio. Is it DiMaggio, or might have been? I'm 99% sure it was DiMaggio. No, it was Gehrig. Gehrig had a piece of jewelry made for his wife that it literally took apart his World Series rings, his other like pieces of jewelry that he had, and he made a bracelet out of it. And I looked at Eric, I'm like, I mean, that piece alone has got to be worth what? If you put it on the market, $10 million? I mean, I don't even know how you would get, when you're talking about some of these one-of-a-kind pieces, to go out and try to purchase this stuff would be it wouldn't work. But the real reason why we really rely only on donations is that once you start buying one thing, we think we'd probably stop getting donations. We were just today, actually, I was walking around with Eric, and one of the things, there you go. It was Lou's wife. Thank you. I love this, Ryan. You guys have more information about this place than I do. This is awesome. if you like today, we were walking around Hank Aaron's exhibit, and I was being explained some things by Eric, and we have his entire collection. He donated literally everything he's ever had to the Hall of Fame. There's about 4 or 5 guys who have donated their entire collections. Now, Henry Aaron did that in the 70s, and what I said to Eric was, we literally, we're walking through the exhibit, and here's home run ball number 711, 712, 713, 714, 715. Each one of those balls is probably worth $1 million now. And the idea that like he just gave them all, you probably in this day and age when people realize just how much that would go for, probably would be much harder to get people to donate nowadays. So it's a long-winded way of saying we do not purchase anything. Everything is donated. On occasion, you'll have someone who will purchase something and donate it. And that has happened recently with a few different collections where somebody said, look, this person's collection belongs in the Hall of Fame and I've got 10 million to spare, so I'll buy it and donate it. Be a nice problem to have when you've got money burning a hole in your pocket, but we do not buy anything.
Do you reach out to people that have incredible things and try to talk them into donating? I mean, I would assume you got somebody who does a lot of pleading and begging.
Yeah, we do. What's interesting, and Ryan just pointed out the Bob Feller's letters. So this has been just recently, it's another story that just popped up on the website recently. So we got a call, probably, I was like my first week or two on the job. It was I hadn't even taken over as president yet because it was like the week before induction, from Bob Feller's wife's, it was his second wife. So this was his stepson. So you got to imagine this guy is probably almost in his 70s. And he was basically clearing out Bob's house. The Indians had already come and gotten the things that they thought was valuable. Like he said, I've got 2 full rooms of stuff that you can have anything you want, but I need it cleared out soon. And so we literally like put Eric on a truck the next week and he drove out to Cleveland and went through as much as he could and found some really cool stuff, including these telegrams that were sent between him and his wife. And they're mostly, literally he's writing, hey, Dopey, I'll be in Chicago tomorrow at 7 if you want to meet me at the train depot. And it's like, is it historically relevant? Not necessarily, but it's incredibly cool. And as we actually just went this past week, we took a trip to the USS Cooperstown to think about how we can decorate the ship when we commission it next year. A lot of these really cool military things that we're finding, they're probably not necessarily worthy of being accessioned into the collection, because once you do that, you're then responsible for keeping care of them for eternity, and that's a long time. So we can't really take in. And so to answer your second question, yes, we do seek out stuff from quite regularly. We're having conversations right now with a couple of, I won't say their names in case it doesn't happen, but Hall of Fame caliber people who have said, I'm thinking about donating my collection. Or certainly we had somebody in the Bay Area who recently said, I've got this unbelievable collection that I will give you under these 7 requirements. And sometimes we can't hit all the requirements. So it's very, you can imagine that we run out of space quickly. We don't just have endless room here. And every item that comes in, you're either, if it has to be insured, if it's a loan, which is why we often don't do loans, the insurance policy for anything that's actually donated is covered differently. But you've got to figure out where you're going to keep it, how you're going to log it, temperature control, fire control, all that stuff. And we just, as a nonprofit, we can't just take in every amazingly cool thing that comes. I sit on these committee meetings once a week, and people go over. We were in one recently where somebody had a cool. It was like a cup from the first night game at Wrigley Field, and I'm thinking, oh man, this is so cool. We totally get. And they like look in the database, like, yeah, we have 3 of those already. I'm like, well, I guess we don't need that one. So you can't believe the level of stuff that we turn away sometimes, which we all would think is the coolest thing in the world. And then the hall says, man, we've actually got several. We don't need to take another, or we have something we already have a bat and a glove from so-and-so. We probably don't also need this baseball that doesn't have any relevance. It's just a cool baseball. So long answer, sorry. Have we found room for Peterson's pearls yet, Ryan? Good question. We did. It will actually, the pearls that we got, this is actually kind of fun. We had really not, when we were in the clubhouse after the Braves had won, myself and John Shestakovsky, our VP of Communications and Education, are the 2 people that basically ask each guy. So going into like the seventh, eighth inning, we're sitting there trying to come up with who we're going to ask for what. And then we kind of divide and conquer. And so I asked a few guys for stuff, and Shesta asked a few guys for things. And we kind of decided we weren't going to ask Jock. They were real pearls, and so they're worth somewhere between $3,000 and $5,000. And we're not going to ask the guy to give us his pearls. This isn't just like a glove. I mean, this is a significantly financially significant piece. And so we had been standing in the clubhouse, and where guys are coming and giving us bats and helmets and balls and gloves and all this cool stuff. And we're taking pictures. And so people definitely knew who we were. There was no question that everybody in the Braves locker room knew who we were and what we were doing. And Jock walked by, and I'm just like, screw it, I'm going for it. And I'm like, hey, Jock, man, we were going to ask you for those pearls, but because they're real, we're not really going to ask for the Hall of Fame. But we would have if they weren't real. And I kind of planted the seed, basically an ask without asking. And he kind of laughed and he walked away. And he comes back a couple minutes later and he's like, "Are you serious about that?" I'm like, "Well, I'm serious if you're serious. Like, if you really want us to take them." And he kind of got a little thought in his mind. And he wandered away again. And he come back like 3 minutes later and he's like, "I just called my jeweler, and jeweler said he'll give me another pair if I want to give you this one." And I was like, "That's incredible. Yes, we would love them." So, and you think about like they were the storyline of baseball in October of 2021. And so they will go into the Autumn Glory exhibit, which is our World Series exhibit, up on the third floor. That'll be where they are for the next year. And then I gotta believe once we have a 2022 champion and a new exhibit, I gotta think the pearls will probably end up in the Braves locker for quite some time. I mean, they're going to be one of the more popular Braves items for a long time to come. James, did you have a question, or that's a hand from before?
Yeah, absolutely. So Josh, congratulations on the job. And yeah, I'm Jim Michaelitz from the Cooperstown chapter in Southern New Jersey.
Nice.
So thanks for sharing some time. I've been to the Hall of Fame, believe it or not, like 10 times. First time when I was a 13-year-old, my dad took me, and I always get a tingle from seeing those lockers of Ruth and Garrick. That to me is always something that's just very powerful. So I got two questions for you. One is kind of more that personal question. And when you're walking through there, is there a certain item or two that you get those kind of those goosebumps when you go by it? Then I have a second question for you.
I don't know why there we go. I went dark here for a second. It's funny. I get that question a lot. And I have not yet. I mean, first, Jackie's plaque is the thing that gives me the goosebumps. When I walk by Jackie's plaque, it just kind of hits me in a way that I don't know how to describe. But as I've tried to as I walk around and try to think about what would that item be, certainly the Garrick bracelet kind of has blown my mind. That Babe Ruth bat, if you guys have seen the Babe Ruth bat with the notches in it from 1927, that every time he homered, he put a little like razor notch in the bat, so you know how many. I think he hit 27 of his 60 homers with that bat. I mean, those the items that have like a story behind them. Even like there's the last out ball from the '88 World Series, which was my childhood like favorite team. And when I got here, the GM of the team, Fred Clare, who donated the ball, he was somebody I met when I first started in baseball. And when I got the job, he said, "You got to keep an eye on this baseball for me that I donated, whatever, 25, 30 years ago, almost 40 years ago, crazy." And so even that item like has a personal significance to me because of what it is, that most people would walk right by the case. And so I think it's different for every person, but I appreciate you asking.
Sure. Yeah, my other question is more of, I guess, a technical question, but one of the controversy that comes up is when a player gets inducted, former player gets inducted, what hat is he going to wear, or what the hat's going to be? Is there a process, or is it simply the player just makes a decision?
No, it's interesting. We actually we say publicly that the Hall will make that decision. We obviously take into account what if a player strongly feels. I know when I was with the Diamondbacks, Randy Johnson really wanted to go in with the Diamondbacks hat, and so I suppose had he only played 2 years for the Diamondbacks and called over and said, "Look, I want to be there," and the Hall might have said, "Look, you had a much larger career in Seattle, and it was really important that," but ultimately, the player does get a huge say in it, but we get the final word. And excuse me, in recent years, obviously, just because free agency and the way the baseball has worked, it's become far more common for people to go in with no logo. What we don't want to do is upset full cities of people. And I think that when someone's getting into take Greg Maddux, like he's just like, if I pick the Cubs or the Braves on my hat, it is going to unfairly upset one or the other. And so we decided for him to not go in, to go in with none. The last thing you want is some amazing weekend that's supposed to be fantastic for Cubs fans. They all roll out here, and he's got a brand. Now it's got this bitter taste. And thankfully, I know as somebody on the other side of it, it was really important to us. We had never had a Hall of Famer with the Diamondback logo before. The Mariners had Griffey, and so they were not bitter. But there were definitely still Seattle fans that are. I mean, Randy still tells me to this day that he angered people by picking the Diamondbacks hat. But I'll tell you, when you think of the greatest free agent contracts in the history of Major League Baseball, I feel fairly comfortable saying it's going to be impossible to top what. I mean, they signed Randy Johnson to a 4-year deal, and he won 4 Cy Young Awards and a World Series. That's about as good as you can get on a free agent contract.
Just like Walker with Colorado.
Exactly.
This year.
Yep.
Great. Thanks so much, Josh.
Sure. Still got a couple more minutes if anybody has anything else they want to hit me with.
So,
I got
go ahead, Kelly.
okay, a couple of questions, Josh. I haven't been to the hall as many times as James has. I look forward to hitting the 10 mark, but the two visits I've had have been great. I've been with my best friend and been with my brothers. The one exhibit that all of us would stop and just look at is the exhibit of baseball cards. Do you have any cards? Is there any cards out there that you do not have? Or is the collection that the hall has essentially every card that's in existence?
Good question. We definitely don't have every card that's in existence. We have certainly, I mean, that exhibit is pretty darn close to complete. It depends on how you look at it. I mean, it's interesting. The exhibit was partially funded by the Diamondbacks owner, Ken Kendrick, who has arguably the greatest collection of baseball cards in the history of the world. If you take the 20 most expensive or rare cards of all time, he owns 17 of them, I think. And so he's loaned several over time, but like nowadays that it's all based on grading, and this Wagner isn't as good as that Wagner and whatever. So we certainly have a lot of the best cards of all time. We do not have what would be considered a complete set of every single Topps card, Donruss card, Leaf card for eternity, but we've got a pretty darn good representation of them. And then we also, we have worked previously with a company called PWCC that is helping sponsor that exhibit. And they loan us cards from other people who they kind of rotate in and out. So it's a lot of people's favorites. And what I think is really cool too, like my son, I collected cards in the 80s and early 90s and loved it. Tried to get my son into it, and he just wasn't into it the way that you or I might have been. But we went to that the first time we walked into the Hall of Fame. We wandered through, we went up to that exhibit. He saw where you could make your own baseball card, and immediately gravitated to the technology of, okay, I can put myself in a 1952 Topps card and make so I mean, it just, there is something for everybody in the building, and even for kind of the current collectors. I think one of the things we'll have to figure out is how do you keep making that exhibit relevant to the modern kid who, I mean, my son's much more excited when he pulls Mike Trout on MLB The Show. He's getting a digital virtual baseball card pack, and he gets to play with the guys that he gets. It's the same feeling you and I had when we opened up a pack and the guy that we wanted was in there. It's just not on a physical piece of cardboard. It's this virtual thing. It's why things like NFTs or all this stuff, there's just so many opportunities for this place. It's pretty exciting.
I think you just passed my intellect when you started talking about the NFTs and everything else.
It's past my intellect too. It's okay.
One last question real quick. You know, with the Negro Leagues achieving major league status, has there been any consideration or talk about the All-American Girls League achieving, or not maybe achieving major league status, but having individual players having their consideration for induction into the hall?
That's interesting. Not to my knowledge, I don't think there has. It doesn't mean, obviously, again, we have the exhibit there. That's one of the most popular exhibits that we have. And so I think from our perspective, it is in fact a part of the museum, and we're documenting the history. I think part of what made the Negro Leagues advanced into that level was kind of the understanding that they were essentially playing at the same caliber of baseball as the major leagues at that point. I'm not sure you could make that argument when you're talking about the major leaguers having left. There was still Major League Baseball going on at the same time. And so I don't know that that's been a consideration, but certainly they'd be eligible for whether it's the Buck O'Neill Award or other things that are not necessarily a plaque in the gallery.
Yeah, and that can be debated both ways very easily.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hanley, do you have something?
Yeah, I have a question. This is kind of goes back to some of the earlier discussion. It follows this one. Probably 20 years ago, I was at the museum, and one of the curators was talking to a group of us, and one of the questions that was raised had to do with recognition of minor league baseball. And at that point, he was talking about a possible initiative for expanding the holdings and recognition on minor league baseball. What's happening these days as far as minor league baseball, as far as the museum?
It is a good question that I probably couldn't answer until about next week. We do have a meeting next week that it covers kind of future exhibits. And I know that one of the things that it's pretty amazing. You can think with all the baseball minds that are in this building, there's a list of about 20 exhibits we would love to do. And I guess once a year, my understanding is once a year in kind of late November, early December, we meet to try to plot out the next 5 to 7 years. My understanding is that's one of the ones that's on the list to be discussed, but I actually don't know the answer. It sounds like when you were here, it was also being discussed. The hard part is prioritizing it, which go first, and how do you decide which to put up and which you don't. But I know that there's one that they've talked about that I think is like a path to the major leagues, which would include everything from like literally little league through college through the minors. I don't believe there's been any movement. In fact, I can tell you there hasn't been any movement because I would know if we were getting close to doing that. So I know a bunch of you are jumping off, and I'm going to actually hop into a different meeting, believe it or not. But I am very grateful for your guys, your time and your interest in the Hall of Fame, and just I hope that if any of you get a chance to make it out here, you'll look me up when you get here. I would love to shake a hand and say hello.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for your time. I feel like they got the right guy. So
Well, that's kind of you. Thank you, Ted.
Hope to see you next summer sometime.
Awesome. Thank you all. Stay safe. Happy Thanksgiving.
Bye-bye.